our brains want as much information as they can. So your brain doesn't tell you when all of the information is enough. So it's just going to keep going after the information and keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling. So one of the most difficult things that we need to learn to do is to realize, when do I have enough information? The goal in our modern information environment is not to know everything. It's to know enough. Those little details and the just, tidal wave of information and distress is not something we are equipped to handle.
Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. As today's guest, Dr. Brianna Migliore, neuroscientist, writer, educator, says, none of this is normal. What we are experiencing in this political moment is incredibly distressing, and it is making most of us feel completely dysregulated. As a neuroscientist, Migliore acknowledges the noise and the chaos and the constant stress surrounding us is overwhelming, and our nervous systems were simply not built for a world like this. So while she understands, and we can all acknowledge, that the U.S. has a long history of cruelty and radicalized violence, and that none of it began with Trump or MAGA, we still find ourselves in a very specific and dangerous point in history. With that in mind, Brianna created something called Dysregulation Nation, which is her online space and Substack, built to use her neuroscientific knowledge and ability as an educator and storyteller to help those of us out here who are drowning build resilience through science and understanding. Personally, I am so happy to have found her work, and I wanted to share it with you. Brianna's goal is clearly to give us the tools that will not only help us survive this moment, but move through and out of it mentally intact. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, neuroscientist, writer, and educator, Dr. Brianna Migliore. Welcome, Dr. Migliore.
It's an honor to be here.
Oh my God, thank you so much for coming. Honestly, I was so happy to find your work because I really do think people are having an incredibly hard time right now functioning in this moment of history. And as you wrote on your Substack, and honestly, your fantastic Instagram page, Dysregulation Nation, that for many of us, the hardest part of this political moment isn't just the cruelty and the chaos and the corruption of this administration and the enablers who are seemingly supporting it, but this realization that we live amongst so many people who don't share our morality or what you call our moral reality. Could you speak a bit on that, please?
One of the reasons that I've really, focused on this account and this social media presence is that I am personally struggling with a lot of this. And so, this has also been a little bit of an attempt on my part to understand from a neuroscience and psychology perspective, why does this make me feel so horrendous? And I think that a lot of people are trying to understand that too. And so the moral incompatibility component, I think, is a very, very strong and distressful thing that a lot of people are feeling right now. And I think part of the reason of that is that it's not just politics. And, I think that's the frustration too. A lot of people dismiss it as, this is just politics. Why can't we all agree to disagree? Why can't we all just, have our own politics and get along anyway? And I think, if politics, current politics, today's politics, if that was a matter of disagreeing about true policy, how we fund our transportation system, or how, the marginal tax rates, or something trivial, or, less existential or morally deep than what we're seeing, I think this would all be a lot easier for people to handle and a lot less grief filled for a lot of people. But we're not talking about politics, really. We are talking about fundamental differences in moral beliefs. When we talk about politics, what I think politics should be about, and what I think a lot of people on the left think politics should be about, it's how do we care for our society and how do we care for each other within our society? But that's not really what, especially today's politics under Trump, that's not what our politics is. It's who do we care for? Who is deserving of our care? Who is us? Who belongs in America? And who's not really belonging? And I think especially if you look at the halftime show for the Super Bowl, that is very clear because the right made it very clear who is American and who may be in America, but they're not real, true Americans. So there's this grief that comes along with realizing that maybe these people that you've grown up with your entire life, so your parents or your siblings, or even, there's quite a few people who have spouses that are, falling into this category right now of people who are just so morally inconsistent with people's values and so morally opposed to people's values that people are really struggling with that right now. And I think I would say that, I've talked about a lot of things on my socials. I'd say that is the number one thing people are struggling with is especially how can I have parents who have raised me, to treat others as I want to be treated, to treat others with kindness and respect. Yet they support policies and they support a man who is the antithesis of that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think we see these terrible things happening right in front of our eyes. And then we watch others minimize it, justify it. And it makes us feel confused. It makes us feel isolated from the people that are supposed to be our people. And then as you pointed out, that kind of isolation is it's almost deeper than loneliness because the people that we know are still there, but we are morally isolated from them. And then we're sort of holding an awareness of what's really happening in the world that other people are refusing to carry along with us. Like they're just not seeing it or they just don't want to see it. And it makes us feel even more alone than we would if we were alone. So
two things related to that I've talked about in my Substack that I think are really important for people to understand is that we as humans from a neuroscience and a psychology and an evolutionary perspective evolved to co-regulate, which means we regulate our nervous system. So we calm and steady and ground ourselves best in the presence of other people. And this is an evolutionary strategy. When we sensed danger, when we lived in our old villages, we became aware of that danger together. We addressed that danger together. And then together we settled back down once that danger was gone. But in today's society, first of all, the dangers are no longer concrete. And they're not things that we can just address. Back when we lived in villages, if there was a rustle in the grass, then you investigated that and you dealt with whatever it was, a predator or whatever. But now we're living with these chronic, never-ending stresses, especially for the last decade and particularly for the last year or more. And, we need that co-regulation still. But when we have people that we're surrounded by that are both actively supporting this danger and this perceived threat or minimizing it, both of those things can be incredibly distressful. So, it's basically this fundamental mismatch between what our senses and our brain and our eyes and our ears are telling us is happening, but what our societal context is telling us to do, to say, don't look at this danger, don't pay attention, or this is not really a danger, this is not a threat. And that mismatch between our reality and what people around us are saying is reality is very disorienting and very dysregulating.
Yeah, because when our values are mismatched with other people, it turns even ordinary social interactions into some sort of work because we have to do things like self-censor or bite our tongues to not rock the boat, right? And many of people are having a lot of trouble doing that these days. They're having trouble continuing to self-censor when they're watching what's happening around them, be it with ICE, be it with the Epstein files, like whatever is happening. And so often that makes people either just like not want to talk to people anymore, to retreat, or it turns us hostile towards people like, how aren't you seeing this? Why are we discussing this? And then our regular social interactions become these minefields that we have to navigate even just to get through our days. And I know I was reading your stuff and you write that, over time, a lot of people have started to isolate themselves from others. And that's not because they don't want connection. It's because the connections themselves are making people feel so unsettled that their nervous system can't handle it, that the connection itself has become a burden. And you're a neuroscientist, so you deal with the brain. Can you tell us about what makes us feel like that our nervous systems cannot handle this constant mismatch?
I feel like the term dysregulation is a relatively known term, but I just want to define that quick because I'm not sure that everyone knows what that is. So when we talk about dysregulation, what we mean is your brain's stuck in alarm mode. So if we think of a toddler tantrum, that's the perfect example, and even more than a tantrum, like a toddler complete meltdown, that is the best example of dysregulation. It's when the logical thinking parts of your brain go offline and the emotional threat reactive parts of your brain are really taking control. So, if you think of a toddler that's screaming over their banana just broke in half or something, something that we think is completely trivial and irrational, there's no logic. There's no frontal parts of their brain logic happening. It's just all completely reactive, emotional.
Is that what they call flipping the switch? Like when it just clicks over and like you're sort of in your lizard brain and you can't use your logic or your common sense to get out of it.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And, that's why when you try to rationalize with a toddler, or even when you try to rationalize with an adult that's completely dysregulated, it doesn't work because they're not thinking with the prefrontal logical parts of their brain. It's all reactivity, emotional stuff. And so, the best strategy usually with a toddler is to scoop them up and, a lot of it's counterintuitive to sort of the old school parenting ways where you should, be harsh, but scoop them up and, sort of lend your nervous system control and calmness to them until they calm down. And then you can explain about the banana. The same thing happens with adults. We get dysregulated. Adult temper tantrums are certainly a thing, but on not such an explosive level, we all get dysregulated. And I would say that many of us, myself included, probably the last decade, but especially since January of last year, we are very dysregulated as a whole.
Yeah, like we're perpetually freaking out and we need someone to lend us like a calm nervous system, but no one else has that either.
Right, yes. And so like a lot of us are seeking out other people that should be our close-knit community and our village for that co-regulation. Especially when if you have a close bond with your parents are the people who your entire life mostly have been the ones you co-regulated with. They're the ones that have calmed you and helped you, settle your own nervous system. So as an adult, when you have different values and when you're saying, I am really distressed by everything that is happening politically, and then that parent figure either extremely minimizes it or says, actually, I support what's happening right now, that's very dysregulating because your body has learned and your brain has learned that person is a source of co-regulation. And then when that co-regulation is turning into further dysregulation, it can be very destabilizing. And the same thing happens within marriages. Those partners have learned to co-regulate with each other. And when you can no longer count on that person for that co-regulation, that can be very dysregulating.
Yeah, like the ground is pulled out from under you. That's supposed to be the place where you learned your values in the first place, or where you put your safety. And all of a sudden, that's not a safe place for you anymore. And it also feels so completely out of line with what sometimes, if it's your parents, they taught you. So it kind of feels justifiable that people start to feel like they prefer not to see other people because they don't know how to interact with people who have shown themselves to be either so different than they thought they were. Like, how can this person who taught me my values suddenly have completely different values than me? Or how can this person who says they love me vote or support these people who, make plans or make policy that would hurt me? I think that's really hard for people. I see so many people who are very understandably devastated, right? Because they're losing their friends and family. They are feeling this sense of grief, but no one has actually died, right?
In psychology, it's called ambiguous loss, where either, that person is still alive or there was no real closure to the end of a relationship or a life. Ambiguous grief is very, very distressful because there is no closure. There is no, when you still have your parents and they're still alive, or you still have a sibling, or you still have, a close friend or a spouse who's still alive, but that relationship has now fundamentally changed. It's not like you can just push that to the side of your brain and just say, I can maintain this relationship the same way that it was before.
And I think people, honestly, Brianna, I think people have tried to do that for a decade. You know what I mean? I really do think that people have tried to be like, let's just keep politics out of it. You're my longest, oldest friend, or you're my college roommate, or you're my mom. Like, let's just have Thanksgiving dinner. Let's make it all work. But I keep thinking about that MLK Jr. quote. In the end, we remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. You know what I mean? Like, those are the things that end up distressing us so much. And I was recently saying in a rant that I was doing that, you know, these people that have tried for a decade to reach out to MAGA people, to reach out to find common ground, to put it to the side, that maybe at this point now, with ICE in our streets and people being shot in the streets and them buying concentration camps, you know, for us, it gets to the point where it's like, maybe now we really do have to sever the relationship, not only for our own emotional regulation, but also to make a point that, like, you don't also get my friendship. You don't get my love if this is what you're supporting. Do you notice that? iQBar protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ mushroom coffees are delicious, low sugar, brain and body fuel that you need to win your day. Personally, I would love to win my day. Some of these days I feel absolutely freaking exhausted. But if you want to transform your frustration into fuel, you can power your day with an iQBar or one of their other products. All iQBar products are packed with delicious, clean ingredients that keep you physically and mentally fit, like magnesium and lion's mane. IQ Mix Sticks are a zero sugar drink mix that hydrate with electrolytes to improve your mood and boost your clarity. Or you can change up your morning routine with an IQ Joe, a mushroom coffee designed for mental clarity and packed with 200 milligrams of natural caffeine. Plus, it comes in different flavors. Many believe it is better than brewed coffee. My boys take the IQ bars in their bags to the gym or to school, and I use the IQ Mix Sticks throughout my day. If you want to give it a try, you can order their ultimate sampler pack. You get 9 IQ bars, 8 IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. Right now, IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the ultimate sampler pack, plus free shipping. To get 20% off, text PG to 64,000. Text PG to 64,000. That's PG to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Do you want to start the new year with a refreshed wardrobe? Maybe you're committed to a new health regime, and now you're thinking that you have a new body, maybe you need a few new clothes to go with it. Well, Quince has you covered. From soft Mongolian cashmere sweaters, like this one that feel like designer pieces without the markup, to 100% silk tops and skirts for easy dressing up, to everyday denim, the wardrobe essentials are crafted to last season through season. I travel a lot, and I often bring this sweater with Quince's maxi burgundy silk skirt, so that it is an easy combination to feel pulled together immediately wherever I happen to be going, is it dinner or a party. Maybe you've made it to mid-February and you're recognizing that you might need a new coat. I would check out Quince's Italian wool coats. Beautifully tailored, soft to the touch, and built for years of wear and not just one season. Fashion influencers are currently raving about Quince's oversized leather jackets because it gives you that super cool girl look without breaking the bank. You're going to see the quality in the stitching, in the fit, in the fabrics. And everything from Quince is made from premium materials in ethical, trusted factories. And then it's priced far below what other luxury brands charge. So refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Don't wait. Go to quince.com/politicsgirl for free shipping on your order and 365 days on returns. And for my Canadian friends and family, you can have Quince in Canada now too. That's QUINCE.com/politicsgirl to get free shipping and 365 days of returns. Quince.com/politicsgirl. You don't get my love if this is what you're supporting. Do you notice that?
I'm glad that you brought that up because that is something. So I saw that rant, the video that you did, and I am so torn. I would say that this is besides all of the grief of everything that is happening, that topic of what to do is one of the things that causes me to lose sleep, because I just there is no real answer or solution that is satisfying. There's not that, or, good. It's a lose-lose situation, because on one hand, I do truly believe that, so I don't know if you know this, but the philosopher Karl Popper said that in order to maintain a tolerant society, we need to be intolerant of intolerance. And so I truly do believe this, that we cannot let intolerance drive our society. which I would argue that it is right now. Like we've swung so much that it is a driving force in our society right now. And we need to push back and go the other way. And so I personally find myself wondering, like, am I upholding the structures in our society that are perpetuating intolerance by not cutting these people out of my life? And there are certainly a lot of people that would say that. I mean, there have been people who have commented on my socials that have said, you need to cut these people out because you're part of the problem because you're not cutting them out. And I understand that because we have spent the last decade at least and more of that where, people like us, people with light-skinned white people, we have really been the ones that have been largely upholding the structures in society that foster intolerance.
Yeah, because there'll be people who are from the Native community or the Black community that are like, we've been intolerant for a long time. The system has been unfair for a long time. This, putting people in jail who don't deserve it, that's been happening for a long time. It's just now happening to us. And we're like, wait a second, But I do think we're in a different moment right now because I think that we're all in danger unless you are 100% MAGA all the time.
I sort of fluctuate between that idea of we need to be less tolerant of intolerance and cut these people out of our lives, that if there are social consequences, people will change their ideas. But I've sort of delved into this new series that I'm working on my socials now and my Substack, where I'm really digging into the psychology of political persistence. My background is in the neuroscience and the psychology behind maladaptive persistence. So, why we do things that are not good for us or are not rewarding. And I think that we can think of political persistence very similarly because objectively, the Trump administration has not been good for anyone. I mean, even MAGA supporters, has really been no good that's come from it. But yet, these supporters continue to support the movement. And so I've really been digging into this because I don't think that shunning people and social consequences is the answer. I think the research tells us that that's not the answer because one does not change their mind at all. And if anything, it makes them dig deeper into their beliefs and it silos them further into their own information ecosystems because now they no longer have you in their life telling them how harmful this is. Yes, exactly. So I don't think that shunning them is the answer. And so, I've been thinking a lot lately about how do we help them see the harm in the world? How do we help them recognize that everyone in our society deserves respect and dignity and care? And so the most recent Substack that I did was one that really resonated with a lot of people because I think it gives you a fundamental understanding of why there is this deep conflict and why there has been this deep conflict between liberals and conservatives largely throughout history. And this is this idea of moral circles. So if we think of the moral circles as how far we extend our moral concern, so how far we extend our care and our concern towards people outside of our immediate circle. So the smallest circle is self, and then it goes out to family, and then you have communities, and then you have nation, and then humanity. And if we think about liberals, we have very broad moral circles. We care about very distant people, marginalized communities, people in other countries, future generations, things like that, which is why concerns like climate change for the future generations and things like immigration and, wars in other countries are really a big concern for liberals. Whereas for conservatives, they have much narrower, on average, moral circles. So their concern is concentrated more around self, family, and close community. And when it does extend to nation, it's also very conditional. So it's not just the entire nation, it's who is seen as truly belonging within this nation. And so that might, include people who are heterosexual white male Christians, for example, or, whatever subset. So research shows us, and it has been well documented, that conservatives have these narrow moral circles and that liberals have these broader, more expansive moral circles. And the thing that I think is most important for people to understand about this is that from within each of those perspectives, so from within the perspective of someone with broad moral circles, the opposite side is seen as wrong. And this goes both ways. So from the broad moral circle perspective, we view people who have narrow moral circles as either selfish or harmful, because these policies based on narrow moral circles can be objectively harmful.
Yeah, because if you're looking at it like what's best for me, what's best for my family, what's best for the people at my church, that does seem very insular. And yet those people would think they were protecting their own, right?
Right. Yes. So from the perspective of someone who has a narrow moral framework, they view people with broad moral frameworks as irresponsible and unrealistic often.
And that's why we get the criticism that it's like these people care more about children in other countries than they do about you.
But there is an important clarification there, though, because there's two possible things that could be happening. It could be either the case that conservatives have narrow moral frameworks and it doesn't extend outward, and liberals have concern that extends outward, but maybe less concern towards the self and the family. But that's not really true. Liberals have everyone.
No, that's not true.
Research shows obviously self is a very large concern, or else, we wouldn't survive if we didn't care about ourselves, evolutionary speaking. So liberals do have strong moral concern towards self, family, and community. They just also have a broader concern out towards other groups.
It's not that I start on the outside and that's where I start caring. It's that my circle expands all the way out to the outside.
Yes. And I think that that's an important distinction, because I think a lot of conservatives believe that liberals have this broad concern, but not the concern for family and close community. That understanding, it doesn't help solve the political difference at all. It's still there, but it does give you a better framework to come from on seeing it's not necessarily the cruelty. Although there is that too. I've written a bit about the concept of schadenfreude, which is a term that refers to taking pleasure in other people's misfortune or pain. And so that's definitely a thing. You can definitely see that there, within the taglines or what have you, with the, liberal tears and, things like that. It's honestly, MAGA is very largely built upon schadenfreude.
The suffering of others, taking pleasure in the suffering of others. Yeah.
There's plenty of MAGA supporters out there that as long as liberals are unhappy, then policy is working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. You might not get a higher minimum wage. You might not get health care. You might have, poisoned water. But if you own the libs, it's worth it.
That phrase, own the libs, that is the embodiment of schadenfreude within the MAGA movement, that it's all about owning the libs.
But if I may, Brianna, I think that's why people think people who support MAGA have been brainwashed into abandoning their morals or manipulated into corruption and authoritarianism through propaganda. Because, I understand that that's a big part of the story, because we've been living through basically a 40-year right-wing media takeover from everyone from Rush Limbaugh to Fox News, right? So there are people who literally do live in information bubbles in which they truly do think that immigrants are storming the border and murdering, beautiful little white children. But I think that explanation is incomplete. And I think you've said that in your writing, that people haven't actually abandoned their moral framework. MAGA just aligned with their moral framework. And that's the kind of psychological difference between MAGA supporters and people on the left.
I'm glad that you brought up the point about media ecospheres too, because when we think of moral circles, the thing that's really difficult with this is that research shows us that threat and fear-based messaging supports narrow moral circles. So it's not just conservatives had moral circles to begin with, and they've always been that way, and they stayed that way. It's that maybe they had them to begin with. It's a bit of a chicken or the egg question here, but the right-wing media environment is pushing these threat-based and fear-based narratives that further narrows moral circles. So when you're faced with a threat, evolutionarily speaking, your focus narrows onto, immediate survival and immediate protection of your immediate social group. So this threat-based propaganda within the right-wing media ecosphere is further narrowing moral circles, which then causes people to have stronger support for policies and politicians that are promoting policies or, rhetoric that is about those who belong, insiders and outsiders, this narrow moral framework.
Because it becomes more about personal identity than political identity. And you can't just change someone's political identity by making a better argument or talking about facts if it's so tied up in their personal identity, because that loyalty is completely different.
Absolutely. And there's research that shows that using facts to change political opinion, especially to correct misinformation, often doesn't work. So it's called the backfire effect.
I think I function in the backfire effect.
So if you, and I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have experienced this, where you have this very fact-based, evidence-based argument with, a MAGA supporter, and you say, here is the evidence. And, there's a whole bunch of responses that you'll probably get. It'll probably have a lot to do with Biden. What about Biden? What about this? But what often happens is that they double down on that misinformation, that they really cling to it even tighter than they might have if you hadn't tried to refute it.
So what do we do about that? I think when you're feeling overwhelmed, cooking can feel like an incredible burden, which is why our podcast works with so many sponsors that offer a number of solutions to the dinner nightmare that we often face. I want you to take care of yourself. I want to be sure that you're feeding yourself and your body a healthy, stabilizing meal. So today I want to talk to you about Cook Unity. Cook Unity allows you to skip the shopping, the cooking, and honestly, the thinking. The meals are delivered to your home, fully cooked, and they heat up in as little as 5 minutes. You choose from a rotating seasonal menu of over 300 meals, or you can let the Cook Unity platform provide personal recommendations for you. You can even choose from their new meal collections like fiber maxing or mood boosting or better for sleep or protein forward. Cook Unity brings restaurant level flavor and chef designed dishes that will balance both your nourishment and your dietary needs, but leave you with the time and energy for other things. Why not try a meal that's ready in minutes, created by restaurateurs and Michelin-starred chefs and James Beard Award winners? Every meal comes in an insulated bag that they will pick up as part of their eco-friendly bag program. Commitment-free subscriptions start as low as $11 a meal, and you can skip deliveries, pause, or cancel anytime. So taste comfort and craftsmanship in every bite from the award-winning chefs behind Cook Unity. Go to cookunity.com/politicsgirl or enter the code politicsgirl before checkout to get 50% off your first order. That's 50% off your first order by using the code politicsgirl or going to cookunity.com/politicsgirl. As they say, cooking quality meals takes time. It just doesn't have to be your time. When it comes to dog food, it feels like you have to make a choice. You can either have fresh and healthy, or you can have easy to store and serve. Why not get both by giving the dogs in your life 100% meat and superfoods that, unlike other fresh dog food, does not need to be refrigerated with Sundays for Dogs? Because Sundays for Dogs has all of those good things, but you can also just pour and serve. I have talked to you many times about my darling sweet golden doodle Chips. He is the best dog in the world, and we are a dog family. Obsessed with this dog, but he is also a completely picky eater. So I know what I'm saying when I say that this food is good. Sundays was founded by a veterinarian and mom, Dr. Tori Wexman, who got tired of seeing this so-called premium dog food being filled with fillers and synthetics. So she designed Sundays, air-dried real food made from a human-grade kitchen using the same ingredients that you would use to cook for yourself and your family. Every bite of Sundays is clean and made from 100% meat, no superfoods, with no kibble. That means no weird ingredients you can't pronounce, no fillers. Compared to kibble or other brands, Sundays invests 50 times more in its ingredients to ensure premium quality. Because your dog deserves food made with care, not in the interest of cost cutting. And the best part? You just scoop and serve. No freezer, no thawing, no prep, no mess. Just nutrient-rich, clean food that fuels their happiest, healthiest days, so you get more of those days to spend together. We travel with Sundays. I keep a bag of Sundays in my office for when Chips gets snacky. And he was recently on a bout of steroids, so he was particularly starving all the time, and he was just having Sundays for lunch every day. Make the switch to Sundays. Go right now to sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl50 and get 50% off your first order. Or you can use the code politicsgirl50 at checkout. That's 50% off your first order at sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl. So what do we do about that?
So I think there's a lot of people that would argue that the way to combat this is just better political arguments, more level-headed, more appealing to common ground and things like that. But I'm actually going to argue against that. I even went to a seminar recently that was called Having Better Political Conversations. And it was all about, trying to find common ground and all of this stuff. But I think that we are trying to push a societal and information ecosystem problem onto individual people. We're saying it's your job to talk to your MAGA supporting uncle and convince him that MAGA is not the way. Where I think that we really need to recognize that people didn't develop this belief based on single arguments with single people. So, they developed it because it was societally supported through, the last decade of Trumpism. And it's been societally supported through our information ecosystems, which, there's this sprawling right-wing, well-funded right-wing media ecosystem now that's just exploded. And, it's not just Fox News, it's all these influencers online and it's podcasts and it's, it's just so pervasive. And if we want to change this, I think we need to look at it more at a societal and a structural level, because research shows us presenting people facts and opinions on a one-on-one basis is not super effective. But what is effective is when leaders and institutions start to shift. So to give you a concrete example of this, if we think about marriage equality, it didn't really become super socially accepted until leaders and institutions started to accept it. What we're seeing now is leaders, one leader in particular, and his entire administration that's really, really driving the whole societal idea of what's acceptable. So our societal norms in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion, are really narrowing because of these leadership and institutional cues. If we want to change this, we need societal changes. First of all, the most obvious one being that we need Donald Trump to not be president anymore, because out of anyone in the world, he is the one pushing, all of this fear-based rhetoric and this dehumanization. And we need leaders who are willing to step up and reverse the narrative. And so, a lot of people are really happy with Gavin Newsom right now because you've probably seen his social media where he's using the sort of Trumpism strategy of all capital letters. And
yeah, his social media team is on point. They are exactly doing the right thing. Yeah.
I might push back that it's not necessarily the right thing, because if we want to not use fear-based rhetoric and sort of exclusionary rhetoric, narrow moral circle rhetoric.
You think we should be taking the Zoran Mamdani route?
Yes.
Which is very effective. It's like show, not tell. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to say like everyone belongs. And here I'm going to do that through policy. And I've hired these people that actually do this. And I'm going to speak to all of us as if we are all one. All New Yorkers deserve X, Y, and Z. And I'm not going to divide us into little spheres. I'm going to say we all are served by this happening. We are all served by this happening. We are all served by giving people free buses because it gets people to and from work. It's good for the business community. It's good for the working community, that kind of thing.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because if we want to talk about how leadership can shape and push norms in a certain direction, that's a great example, because he has all these democratic socialist policy ideas, like the universal child care, like that. A lot of people are like, well, that's impossible. We can't do that. It's just, and then, he goes in and he's like, well, what? I'm going to do it. And so our idea, our social norm of what's possible within our political system has now expanded with it very quickly, very quickly.
Yeah.
And so that's a perfect example of how leadership can either, broaden our idea of what's possible and who belongs, or narrow it.
And that's less us having one-on-one conversations with our mega uncle and showing through societal or institutional change that there is a different way to be doing this.
Right. If you are someone living in New York City, you yelling at your uncle that universal childcare should be the right thing to do, and here's X, Y, Z, is realistically not what's going to change childcare in New York City, But people coming in and leadership coming in and saying, this is this vision I have, it's possible, let's do it. Those are the sort of things that change.
But the individual's role in that would be doing the work to get someone like Zoran Mamdani elected, because he did that despite the power of the institution of the Democratic Party. He did that because they worked against him wholeheartedly. And he had enough people working as individuals to get him to that position where he could show us that there's a different way of doing things. I just want to make sure before you you go? Because I think so many people are drowning in this Epstein thing, that we talked just a little bit about this idea that like there's no amount of self-care that we can do to fix the feelings that come from witnessing this democratic collapse we're living through, from witnessing state-sanctioned violence or relentless propaganda, or like the amount of files that are coming out that are just so appalling, what we're reading that happened to these children, that we can't just light a candle and sit in a bath and be like, okay, I feel better, I'm regulated now. But we also can't live in perpetual stress or check out. None of these things are available to us. Like Steve Bannon said, they were going to flood the zone. They were going to give us so much information at once that we couldn't handle it, and we shut down. We don't engage. We give up. And then they're allowed to do whatever they want. And I think that's the most particularly obvious when we think about the Epstein files, because you put in a post recently that we are not personally equipped to consume material like the Epstein files, that we're not, our nervous systems are not ready for this repeated exposure to this kind of material without any sort of safeguard or structure or a way to recover. We're just sort of completely overwhelmed every day. And then the algorithms of our social media feeds only lead to more of that. And I think what you were trying to say is that it's not that we have to stop caring about what happened in, say, the Epstein files or what's going on in politics. God knows we need to keep really on top of it. But we have to understand that this kind of like unregulated exposure to it can end up impairing our judgment or increasing our distress so much that taking any action feels impossible, not possible anymore, that we have to place limits on what we consume to preserve our ability to stay engaged.
Yes, exactly. So if we think about our brains, our brains are essentially information gathering machines. This is their entire job, is to gather information and to resolve uncertainty. So when we look at something like the Epstein files, there's a lot of uncertainty there, because we're like, who did what actually happened, what was the extent of it? And now there's so much misinformation out there too. It's like, what if this is true and what if this is not true?
And why are we doing nothing? I think that's what most people are. Why are we doing nothing? Like,
yes.
they just get away with it. Like, I think that's what most people feel like. Like, are you kidding me? Are you
absolutely.
kidding me? Are you kidding me?
And so,
yeah.
The reason it feels so compulsive almost to read, because I felt it too. I went down this huge doom scrolling, unpleasant rabbit hole of reading the Epstein files. And I just had to step back and be like, wow, like I am really distressed right now and really not doing great mentally. And I need to like just sort of pull myself back. And that doesn't mean disengage entirely, but our brains want as much information as they can. So your brain doesn't tell you when all of the information is enough. So it's just going to keep going after the information and keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling. So one of the most difficult things that we need to learn to do is to realize, when do I have enough information? The goal in our modern information environment is not to know everything. It's to know enough to take action, enough to know the scope of the harm, enough to know that accountability, is due, but it's not happening. But we don't need to know every single tiny detail, because those little details and the just, tidal wave of information and distress is not something we are equipped to handle. Professionals who look at this sort of content, the child sexual abuse material, have policies often in place that protect them, limits on the amount of time spent on certain cases, rotation policies, and they go home after and maybe don't think about it so much, where we have our phones right in front of us and are scrolling all of the time, maybe while we're falling asleep. And then when we wake up in the morning, and we're just constantly getting this extremely distressing information. And I think that there are a lot of people that have just felt, that these victims deserve our full attention, that we have to give them our full attention, or else we are not doing our part in serving justice or, witnessing their pain and their injustice. But I think we need to realize that, more trauma and more pain in the world does not bring accountability.
But it goes back to your point about structural and institutional and societal is that we take the information we have. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I have enough information to know that I need a justice department that's actually going to do its job, which means that my individual job is to elect new leaders that will give us like a justice system that will actually bring these people to justice. I don't need any more, photos of horrible things that happen to children. I know enough to know that I need a new president, a new justice system. We need accountability, and I need to be relentless about that without going down a rabbit hole of 300 million photos and videos and pictures of horrible things that happen to children. At this point, I know enough to know that I need to put my energy towards getting a better attorney general, a better justice system, more accountability for institutional failures.
I think that view that you have is very common, that we need better people in political office. But one point I do want to make is that I think we need to understand, like, if we look at the right, a lot of what they have done, a lot of the change that they have made is outside of formal political office. This information ecosystem that they have is what has changed popular opinions largely more powerfully than those who are in office. And so one thing that really frustrates me is when people within the Democratic Party or people outside of it talking about Democrats say, well, we're the minority party. They're the minority party. There's nothing that they can do. And I think that this is such a bad mindset, because there is so much that can be done, particularly in the information ecosystem. So Kamala Harris just came out recently with they're using their social platform that they had during the campaign, and they're sort of transforming it into this information hub, they're calling it, to try to pull in younger voters. And a lot of people were mixed opinions on this, but I was kind of excited about this because I was like, if this is the first step towards some sort of alternative to Turning Point USA, this is great. I think that this is fantastic, because we need people on the left to realize that you do not need to be in power to shape social norms, to shape what the collective people believe is possible, or, who belongs in America. These sort of ideas are not shaped just by politicians or just by elected office. They are shaped by information.
Well, you started by saying, that the halftime show at the Super Bowl, you were saying that, like, that is cultural shifting of who belongs in America, not done through politics, but done through popular culture. And I think we can do that. I think one of the things that shifted America far earlier than politics itself was people like Rush Limbaugh, right? Talking on talk radio all the time, that you're able to shift the culture that way, that we can do that both from the inside by electing new people, which is something I want to do, but like you're saying, from the outside as well. So before you go, what advice would you leave people with as they go forward into these difficult days to feel less spun out, to keep their mental health stable, but while continuing to try and shape the world, to do these things like changing the culture, talking to our people, using what we know to make effective change? What advice would you give people as they go forward to keep themselves regulated?
First, people need to find a values-aligned community. Our nervous systems regulate best with other humans, and we regulate ideally with other humans who have the same values. So it's critically important, and it can be very difficult, but it's critically important to find a values-aligned community to, hold people through this moment and to support them and their nervous systems. And then the second thing is, what I said before, which is we need to try really hard to figure out how, or, to realize that we do not need to know everything. We just need to know enough to enact change. We do not need to spend all of our time doom scrolling and distressing ourselves in order to effectively change or to effectively, be part of this movement, or this resistance. We just need to find enough information without causing our nervous systems more distress. So those two things, responsible and intentional media consumption, along with community.
I'm writing that down.
Yes. Yes. And I've written a couple of pieces. I wrote a piece recently on how to find community in our society that is not structured in a way that facilitates community. So that's a whole nother topic. But
Yeah, no, I'm so grateful for your work. Honestly, I'm so grateful you came to join us today, Brianna. Please tell people how they can support your work and watch what you're doing and listen to what you're doing and read what you're doing moving forward.
So I'm on Substack. That's sort of my main platform. Substack is very regulating. The other platforms are very dysregulating. So I happen to really like Substack because it's personally very regulating for me.
And it's Dysregulation Nation on Substack.
DYS, autocorrect will almost certainly change it to either deregulation or DIS, which is wrong. So it's DYS, Dysregulation Nation. And I'm also on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Threads. Although I would not recommend, if you want regulation, going on Threads, because my Threads is less regulated content. So
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I just love your work, and I really hope people will follow you. I am an Instagram devotee of your work because I really do think you put it so succinctly, and it really helps as we go forward into this time to have that kind of sense, especially coming from a science brain. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I've been a long time follower of your podcast and your social media, so it's really an honor for you to say that and to be here today.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us. So that was Dr. Brianna Migliore reminding us that humans evolved to co-regulate, that we are best in the presence of other people, and our instinct to avoid others to mitigate our stress right now is potentially adding to our nervous system feeling out of whack. We are stuck in alarm mode, taking in so much information that it is shutting us down. Brianna advises that we find values-aligned communities to help support us through this moment, that we practice responsible media consumption so we can know enough while still being productive, and we support change not just through one-on-one relationships or politics itself, but through societal and structural change outside of the political system. I want to thank Dr. Migliore for joining us and you for caring enough about this country to be here. Now, take a break from your phone and make some plans with your values-aligned friends or groups. It'll really help your mental health to know that you are not alone in all of this. Until next week, PT out. Before you go, I don't know if you've noticed, but left-wing and progressive creators like myself who share truth and facts are getting drowned out by right-wing propaganda and lies. The mainstream media is barely hanging on and is becoming harder and harder to find anything that isn't billionaire-backed propaganda at this point. So if you respect what I'm trying to do here, if you learn something from my work, from my podcasts or my rants, if you would like to get this podcast ad-free delivered directly to your inbox along with my kitchen rants or my TV spots, then please consider becoming a member of PoliticsGirl Premium by going to PoliticsGirl.com and signing up. If you are already a PoliticsGirl Premium member, thank you so much for your support. And if you're not, please consider becoming a patron of my work. If you want real knowledge in a world of lies, it is essential that we support those of us out here still doing the work. There is a link to sign up in the bio of this episode, but also at PoliticsGirl.com. And as always, please like and support this podcast. Share it with other people so that we can grow our audience, because the more people who have access to this kind of information, the better. As always, thank you so much for your time and support.
The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.